Hello friends, welcome to Coding Garden. In this video, we're going to talk about Tailwind. We're going to talk about what it is, what it isn't, what you might compare it to, and then we're going to talk about how we are making a decision about a specific Tailwind UI component library we're going to be using in the app that we're building. And then we're also going to talk about some potential plugins and tools you can use with Tailwind. So first, what is Tailwind? TailwindCSS.com, their tagline, rapidly build modern websites without ever leaving your HTML. You can read their docs. They got a really good marketing team. They talk about why you would use this thing. They tell you how to set it up. And there's been a lot of controversy about Tailwind lately, mainly because people kind of don't like the way it looks. It feels like inline CSS, which we've been told all of our careers that we shouldn't do, or which is bad. I mean, there's reasons for it and not for it, but let me just give you the basic rundown of what Tailwind gives you. So it's utility first. So right now, if you're just using like Sass and BIM or something like that, your code might look like this. You have some elements, they have some class names on them, and that will render out something that looks like this. You can see all of those class names are defined below. Sometimes this would need to be in a separate file. If you're working in a component library like Vue or Svelte, it might be co-located and like right next to the component code or the template code. But this is kind of what you're used to if you have been working with regular CSS. And then Tailwind, you get the same result, but your code ends up looking like this. So essentially, you have a bunch of utility classes that define the same things. Now, this is where people start to freak out and they're like, "Ooh, it's ugly. I don't want to do this. That's me right now. But let me calm you down and point out a few more things you might not have noticed. Because Tailwind isn't just these utility classes, it's also a design system that has built-in decisions and predefined units. So let's take a look at this. Like one thing that we don't have in this example are variables, right? So for instance, we have a border radius of 0.5, we have a max width of 24 rem, we have a padding of 1.5 rem, we have a font size of 1.25 rem. There's a lot of variables here, and I mean, if this were JavaScript code, these would be magic variables, right? We would literally just have numbers in our code. Now, you could say that in another code base, I actually would extract these out into like reusable variables, but you get that by default with Tailwind. So this is kind of like one reason why you might use Tailwind. You see this P-6. The -6 doesn't mean 6 rem or anything like that. It's actually comparable to 1.5 rem. And once you learn their design system and you know P1, P2, P3, P4, now you can have more consistent padding throughout. You can see some other magic variables in here, like built-in responsive design, so max width small. In the case over here with variables, we have max width 24 rem. So obviously, you could code this a different way. You could add in variables, but with less code now, because you don't have to directly reference those variables, you can start using those kinds of things. Same thing with like h-12. So if we look at the image class, that's going to be a height of 3 rem. So the -12 in terms of height is 3. Now, and so like Derpsauce is mentioning in the chat, you also can just put your own variables in, but you probably don't want to do that because then you wouldn't be benefiting from the design system that's built into it. Now, obviously, this is a whole new system that you need to learn. You need to learn, like, what are all the numbers and what do they correspond to? But just like anything else you've learned in your career, you could potentially learn this. So this is what Tailwind is. This is kind of why people hate it, but I'm kind of giving you some reasons why you might actually use it. Now, what is Tailwind not? Tailwind is not Bootstrap. And let me show you why. So, for instance, like if we wanted a button, we would essentially have to assemble all of these classes together, and Tailwind does not give you that. I don't know if I can find any examples in their docs. Let's see. Like this. So you can see this is a nicely styled button, but Tailwind doesn't give you that button. Tailwind gives you the classes that you have to assemble into that button. So you can see that it has a little ... here. There's actually some missing classes. Let's actually just inspect it and see what the CSS classes are. There we go. So background sky 500, pixel 5, PXY, so padding in the x-axis of 5, padding in the y-axis of 2, text small, leading 5. I think that might have to do with text, rounded. Basically, all of these CSS classes result in a button that looks like this. If we try to compare this to Bootstrap, Bootstrap gives you a single class, BTN, and BTN primary, right? So Tailwind to Bootstrap or Tailwind to any other CSS framework is not a one-to-one comparison. That's one thing to note and one thing to understand when you're kind of when you hear people talking about Tailwind, because Tailwind alone isn't going to give you like nicely styled buttons and like nicely styled cards. It gives you utility classes that you then assemble to get this kind of thing. So in terms of reusing those styles, so you might say, hey, I don't want to have this in my code all the time. How can I assemble Tailwind classes together into a single thing that's more similar to like BTN or BTN primary? They have a way. It's the apply directive. So in Tailwind, and specifically this is like a post CSS plugin where you can basically create your own class called button primary that is an assemblage of those classes. Now you could argue why this is good or bad or why you wouldn't use it, and actually a lot of Tailwind proponents actually don't like this. But regardless, that is one way that you could do it with Tailwind. Now, let's keep moving. So what we've covered so far is that Tailwind is not Bootstrap. Tailwind is all of these utility classes, and you assemble them together to give yourself a UI component. And one of the arguments I was making for it is that it basically gives you a design system with built-in variables that you don't have to reference directly. Once you know the design system, you just get it. Hello there, future CJ here. Just a few things to add that I omitted when I was originally recording the video. So when I was talking about Bootstrap, I was really just focusing on the component classes like button and card and stuff like that. What I failed to mention is Bootstrap actually also includes utility classes, very similar to the ones that you see in Tailwind. So if you look at Bootstrap, it has things like a flex utility. So deflex would create a flex box. It has things like position utilities and color utilities and display utilities. So a lot of the stuff that you might get with Tailwind, you also could get that with Bootstrap. So I did fail to mention that. And a lot of people that have chosen Bootstrap already get kind of this utility class thing on top of all of the components. The other thing I didn't mention was what you could actually compare Bootstrap to, because I use Bootstrap because it's the most popular thing, but there's a lot of other things out there that fall into the same bucket and category as Bootstrap. Things like Bulma. So Bulma has pre-built elements like buttons, and all it takes is a single class button to give you that button, but it also has utility classes. If you look at its helpers, they have things like Flexbox helpers and stuff like that. There's UIKit, Pure CSS, Materialize CSS, anything that's called a CSS framework kind of fits in the same bucket as Bootstrap, and most of these all have utility classes as well. The other thing that I did not mention was that the idea of utility classes is not new. It's been around for actually a long time, and there are a lot of things that informed Tailwind and Tailwind was inspired by. So this article by Chris Coyier from 2017 details some utility libraries like Shed CSS, which has like display flex helpers with like a weird colon syntax, and various other position helpers and text helpers. There's also tachyons, which kind of seems like maybe the biggest inspiration for Tailwind. A lot of the utility classes have like the same name in tachyons. There's also base CSS and turret CSS. And then this article from LogRocket also breaks down by year some other libraries that might have influenced Tailwind. So Tailwind isn't new. They just have a really good marketing team, and it's gotten enough adoption that there's an ecosystem of libraries and packages built on it that it's kind of like won out in terms of all the utility libraries that are available. So just wanted to add that in. Back to the video, and maybe you'll see me again. I don't know if there's anything else I forgot, but I'll see ya. Okay, now let's say you want something like Bootstrap, which I do. I don't typically design my UIs completely from scratch. I typically reach for like Bootstrap or Material Design or some other CSS framework. And as we've said, Tailwind is not that. So what do? You find someone that's built a library on top of Tailwind. So Tailwind UI is from the actual Tailwind team, and this is that. So they have components, and like hero sections and whatever else, and they essentially give you a pre-created list of Tailwind classes that's going to give you UI elements like this. Now, Tailwind UI is a paid product. You can look at their stuff to see if you'd like it, but there are free alternatives to it. So one of those is daisyUI. So daisyUI is a Tailwind 4 plugin. You basically have Tailwind set up, you add this as a plugin, and now you get access to these kinds of buttons. And the class that you get is BTN. So if you were to use daisyUI, now, instead of having to assemble all of these classes together, you get a very similar experience like you would have in Bootstrap, but daisyUI is providing those for you. And daisyUI has a lot of different themes. So they have like a dark theme, and a cupcake theme, and I like the forest theme because it's green like Coding Garden. But you can look through daisyUI and they have all these things. They have buttons and cards, and you get like a Bootstrap-like experience, but now built on top of Tailwind. And the reason you might do that is now you can benefit from the design system of Tailwind with these pre-built components. And there are other options. There's Flowbite, Similar idea. If you look at the Flowbite docs, they actually do show you all of the classes they're using to get that. And so like technically you could just like copy paste this into your project if you want to. They also, I believe have a plugin where you can use it in a similar style. I don't know as much. And then I also found Sailboat. So if we look at Sailboat, again, it's providing you with these pre-built components, but it actually gives you the Tailwind classes that you can copy and paste. Again, this is where people are going to be freaking out like, oh my goodness, look at all those CSS classes. And that was my initial reaction, but we also haven't talked about the developer experience of CSS, which I guess I can talk about a little bit, right? One of the arguments for Tailwind as well is like, let's say you're in a large code base and you come across this little bit of markup. What does it mean to be a chat notification, right? So this is one of the arguments for Tailwind is if I'm just using CSS classes and I look at this class, what does it do? Does it apply padding? Does it change the background color? I don't know. The only way I'm going to know is I'm going to need to context switch into the styles. Now, you may argue that if I'm in a Svelte component or a view component, like a single file component, it's not too much context switching because I just scroll down and I can see it. But you potentially also have to deal with the CSS cascade, because it's possible that this is not the only class that's affecting this element. It's possible that you have global styles that have cascaded and are targeting this element as well. So even looking at this CSS, you actually don't know all of the CSS that has been applied to it. So that's another argument for, okay, so now when I do see something like this, at a glance, I can actually tell how it's styled and what it's being applied to. Now you could argue, that's a lot of scroll. I don't want to do that lot of scroll. And there are tools that can help you with that. First of all, there's the Tailwind CSS IntelliSense. So this will, inside of VS Code, show you all of the Tailwind classes that are available as you start typing. So that's one thing. The other thing is a lot of Tailwind devs like to do this inline fold where you essentially can collapse the classes. I mean, I haven't used this yet. I am just beginning on my Tailwind journey, and I think I'll probably use this because at least when I'm navigating a component, it's going to make it a little less busy, and then if I really do want to modify the styles, I can expand it. That's one thing as well. So all of that to say, here's some options if you don't want to write all your styles from scratch, but you still want to use Tailwind. Now, we specifically are building an app in SvelteKit. So SvelteKit is a meta framework built on top of Svelte that's going to give us front end and back end and server side rendering and also hybrid rendering and all of that good stuff. We're going to be using this. And because these things I showed you, like daisyUI or Flowbite or Sailboat, because they are just CSS, you could actually just use them directly with SvelteKit. Like, no issue. There's no potential things you could run into because it's like interfering with JavaScript or anything like that. These base libraries are literally just CSS and will work just fine with SvelteKit. But today we talked a lot about how we actually don't just want the styles. We don't just we actually want a little bit of interactivity. And an example of that might be, let's say, like a drop down. So in daisyUI, we have this little drop down. We can click it. We get a UI like that. Also, if we want to see the accessibility, like the tabbing, you can see that when I start tabbing, those things select. Right now, when I tab, it selects the button, but if I tab again, I actually can't use the arrow keys to select the drop-down. Now, there might be a way to do this. There might be a way to actually modify the HTML to get like full keyboard navigation here, but it doesn't look like it's built in. I'd have to do a little bit of digging. So what we looked for was a component library specifically for Svelte that's built on top of Tailwind that provides pre-built components. And the one that we chose is Skeleton. So, for example, if we find a menu in here, we can see that if I click this and press enter and then press my arrow keys, I guess I've decided, but now this kind of like gives me accessibility in here that I can use my keyboard to navigate the UI components. There's also things that you can only do with JavaScript that they've implemented as components. So, for instance, toasts. Toasts are a UI thing where a little thing will pop up, and then after a little bit, it'll disappear. So I think after 5 seconds, this thing disappears. Great. If you want to implement that, you need some interactivity. You need JavaScript, or in this case, you need some kind of like Svelte code, which is really just JavaScript or TypeScript. If you look at toasts, for example, in daisyUI, let's find it. toast. They cannot give you the ability to automatically hide something after 5 seconds, right? They can give you the styled toast, and you can see all of their examples, like they have some stuff here, right? Great. But you would have to implement the functionality to like automatically hide a thing after 5 seconds. And that's actually what we're getting with Skeleton UI. They literally give us this capital T toast component we can import into our Svelte app. And then they give us some codes we can write and to customize it. So like how long should it appear? Should it automatically hide? These kinds of things. And so if we were just using daisyUI with Svelte, we'd have to implement all of that ourselves, which is why something like Skeleton is really nice because they've done the hard work of designing all of that. And everything we see here in utilities has that JavaScript functionality abstracted away from us. We have customization, but we don't have to write custom JavaScript code. So like this is a drawer that opens from the right, and all of that good stuff. So Skeleton works with TypeScript, absolutely. For instance, I think when you're in here, they have this type toast settings, and if I were working in this object, I would get autocomplete as to what options are available to me. So that's a thing. They also just have base components like daisyUI. So if we look at, for instance, buttons, that's just going to be some CSS classes, BTN, because we don't need any more JavaScript to make a button work. We kind of just need the CSS. So Skeleton is a combination of both. You have like the base CSS, but then you also have the Svelte components and utilities that give you the interactivity on top of that. So that's why we've chosen SvelteKit. We've chosen Skeleton, so it's going to work with our SvelteKit app. We get the benefit of having Tailwind, so if we do want to customize these elements, we can just start adding Tailwind classes and change them up if we want to. But we also get the added benefit of the utilities and the actions. Now, Skeleton is not the only UI kit built on top of Tailwind for Svelte. We also found Smelt.js. So they give you components here, and there might be a few others, but really, we're talking about component libraries built on top of Tailwind that give you pre-built components and also interactivity. Yeah, so Skeleton is specifically for Svelte. And we're talking about Svelte right now. If you were building a React app, you would want to try to find a library specifically that works with React and built on top of Tailwind. So for instance, like Flowbite actually has, Flowbite has component libraries. So this would have been a potential option. I've ran into issues getting it work with SvelteKit. It may be fixed by now, but this would give you, if you look at their library, that could give you a similar functionality as what you would get with Skeleton. So that's a thing. Another one that I guess I didn't mention earlier was Konsta UI. This one is really cool, especially if you're doing hybrid mobile development. So this gives you buttons, and if you're on, I guess this is the Android look. Yeah, I'm in material theme. If you're on Android, then this would look fine, but you can also swap it out for iOS. And now your UI looks like iOS. So if you're building a hybrid mobile app with something like Capacitor.js, this could be really cool. And they have components for Svelte. Honestly, if you wanted to use the material theme, you don't have to be building a hybrid mobile app. It's just, I didn't really want to go for the material design look. I'm more so I like the look of Skeleton, so we're going to go with that. But that was another potential option. And then, like I said, there's Flowbite Svelte, which gives you components that have all of those styles wrapped up. Now, did I miss anything? Are there any questions in the chat? Did you learn anything? Are you slightly convinced? Did I maybe slightly reduce your Tailwind rage a little bit? Let me know in the chat. Limon says, I feel smart now. Thanks, yeah, no problem. What is Tailwind? Great, everybody. I'm so glad that I get it. I'm so glad that I convinced you. Esime says, I learned I don't know much and much to learn. Sure, yeah, and I think, I guess closing words are, honestly, like the first time I saw Tailwind, and honestly my first experience with Tailwind was using Flowbite, and really, all of these CS classes is, this is initially what I was just like, I don't want to do this, and I because I don't design UIs completely from scratch, I typically would reach for something like Bootstrap, and that's kind of the experience I was looking for, and you didn't really get that when you're copying and pasting all of these styles, but we're going to give it a shot. So this app that we're building is going to be my first big app built with Tailwind, and we'll see how it goes, because really it comes down to, like, do I like using it? Like, do I like working in a code base built with it? And I think especially because we're going to be using something like Skeleton, I actually won't have to see the Tailwind styles as much, but I can use them if I need to. I guess one thing I didn't run into, and like one of the aspects I do like about utility classes are things like Flexbox, right? Like, how many times have you created a single CSS class just to make something a Flexbox? Probably a lot. Where would I, would this be in display flex? Far too many, right? So you create like one little display flex. Yeah, so you do this so many times, you want a container to be a flexbox, so you have to name that container, you add the CSS styles, and now you actually have multiple containers in your app that are all the same centered flexbox. With Tailwind, you literally have a class called flex, you have a class called flex center, I'm guessing, we need to, the flex items, actually it wouldn't be center, it would be like justify center. That's the thing, I still have to learn the Tailwind classes, but if you do flex and then justify center, you have just created a flex box with justify content center. And then if you do like W-100, you can get 100% width container, or like width full is what it is. So it's nice that you don't have to create CSS classes all the time, especially for like little one-off utilities. And I think that's going to be nice when we're working in specifically Skeleton, because we get these pre-built components, but now when I need like little one-off flex boxes, I already have Tailwind, so it's easy enough to do. Oh well, that's all I have to say. Hopefully you learned a little bit. Hopefully I made you a little less mad, and maybe you'll try Tailwind and see if it's for you. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next one.